So welcome to week 2, legislation. So let me get going with a little PowerPoint. And let's walk through what the plan is for today. Okay, so today it's about legal considerations, and I put this always at the beginning of HR courses, and it doesn't matter if it's a general one like this or when I'm teaching labor relations, because the legal considerations are really important because they are the baseline in terms of what we can and cannot do. And so it's important that we understand those things before we get too deep into some of the ideas. And especially the other thing is understanding that a lot of the material that we might be reading from consulting groups is coming out of the States where they have different legal rules. And so we want to make sure that we understand what we can and cannot do. So the first thing I wanted to run through were a couple of questions that had come up this week. Then we're going to look at the case studies from the worksheets that you guys were working on. And then we're going to have a game of Kahoot. I don't know if people have played Kahoot before, but it's kind of a fun game. I would recommend playing on your phone if you have your phone with you, but we'll get there towards the end. Okay, so questions. There were 3 basic questions that came up this week that I wanted to address with the whole group. The first was about assessing the library materials, because some people were having some problems with the links that were on the website and the Dalhousie library. And the first thing I wanted to tell you is you're not alone. That when I talked to Jesse, he said that this was happening in a number of the courses, and he gave me some instructions to share with everybody. So I put that up as an announcement. So if you are having any problems, check that out. And if you're still having problems, then you have to phone the systems people to help you get it sorted. The second question I had this week, which is an important one, is about grading. Because of course, this was the first time you guys got any grades for the course. So with the facilitated discussion and the discussion board. So just a little background on that. I mean, as you can see, not everybody can always make it to this 1-hour session. And so we need to give people an alternative way of participating each week and addressing some of the questions that we're dealing with in the class. So you do have the choice between joining us in the facilitated discussion or posting your thoughts up on the discussion board. And as you guys were noting last week, that you get the best 10 out of 12 grades for your participation. But apparently the system doesn't show that until at least 3 marks are in there. So if you're getting some weird messages through Brightspace, don't worry about it. If you're still getting it after week 3 or week 4, let me know. But for now, it's saying some weird things. And also, when you participate in the facilitated discussion, you might get a notice saying, hey, your discussion board posting is late. Don't worry about it. It's an either or. It's set up, the system's set up to give you a prompt on the discussion board, but it's not to do it on the facilitated discussion because it's through the Zoom meeting. So don't worry about that. And then the last thing I got asked about was the textbook, and I've referenced it. I referenced it a lot more earlier in the course, and then as I was getting on in developing the course, it became painfully obvious to me that the textbook fell behind during the pandemic. And so there is some really up-to-date readings that you have the opportunity to to access, and videos and podcasts. So I would, unless you're planning to take the professional designation, don't worry about a textbook, because it might cost you some money, and I don't want you to spend money on something that isn't going to be useful. And I don't think that it's up to date enough to make it worth the expense. So that's sort of my advice. And then the last thing I say, if you're still struggling and you're thinking you want to get the textbook, please chat with me first. Before you spend any money, talk to me, okay? Any other questions that I should be answering? If you raise your hand using the, what is it called? Reactions, then I'll see that you have another question for me, and you'll pop to the top of my group. No other general questions? So I hope you're finding stuff on the site, and if you're having any problems finding things, just flip me an email, and I'll get back to you as quick as I can. Okay, so the first activity for today are the case studies. So there were 4 different case studies that I asked you to do. So I'm going to put you in 2 groups of 4, ask you to finalize your thought about one of the particular issues, and then finish the chart that's on the page so that you can share it with the rest of the class. So I got to set multiple, so now everybody can share throughout the thing. And I don't think you need to give us the answer for every question, but as you're in your group, if there's one or two of the questions where there was a discussion and some debate around what the right answer might look like, or some general feedback you want to give us on how to come up with the best answer, I think that would be most useful, rather than going through each and every one of them and giving us the response. Okay, does that any questions about that? And you might want to, I'll just move that over in case that's in your way. You might want to take a picture of what I'm asking you to do while I put you into some groups. Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so let's have a look at that first one, the first question, and let me just see what it was about. So the first question was all about jurisdiction and Shoppers Drug Mart. So could the first group just give us an example of what you came up with on that one? Jessica.
Sure.
The speaker, who's the speaker for you guys? Stevens.
I guess I can speak for us.
Okay.
So we had it as provincial jurisdictions,
Okay.
and then we associated the province with what was in the example. So Ontario, Nova Scotia, Northwest, Saskatchewan.
Okay. So that one was really getting to the importance of, and I use this analogy with one of the groups because they were kind of struggling. When you have a company, they can only be under federal or provincial, but they can't be under both. Because if they were under both, it would be like playing hockey by the rules of hockey and basketball. Like, it's just bedlam. So we have to figure out, and Shoppers Drug Mart, it's retail. And so Steve was saying that it falls under provincial, and then you just have to look at each province and figure out whether and how much you have to be paying, right?
I think that was the next one.
Oh, sorry. So you were just figuring out the jurisdiction, and that's all in what province?
Yeah.
Pretty straightforward. Any of them give you guys problems?
We had a couple questions about the last one where it was the distribution center.
Yeah.
Because shipping and the highways fall under federal jurisdiction. So that kind of threw us for a loop, but we stuck with provincial.
And I would have too, because the difference is between a distribution center, you're assuming that most of the stuff is interprovincial or within the province. Whereas if it's like a moving company or a large shipping company, they might be shipping all over Canada. Okay.
Okay, so we were right going in with provincial then.
Yeah. But
Okay.
that was a good question. Yeah. Good stuff. Okay, let's go to case number 2 with poor old Parmeet who wasn't getting paid enough. So who's gonna talk to this one?
I can do that for group.
Okay, great.
So so for part 1, we just threw a few bullets together. It was clear that she's poorly paid, grossly underpaid. And one of the group members had a great link from your sources that showed from the Retail Council of Canada. She shared a link with us that shows a infographic and the rates by province. So the lowest rate in the province, I think, was Saskatchewan at $11.81 per hour. So she's grossly underpaid by any provincial standard. And we referenced the following legislation: pay equity. Compensation is listed there. Pay must be based on skills and value delivered, not gender. Employment equity, women are one of the protected classes, and the legislation includes compensation and potentially human rights if she feels discrimination is a factor.
Okay, but the key one is,
Pay equity, I believe.
what do you say, Kim? You're shaking your head.
The
Oh.
Employment Standards Act.
Yeah.
Oh, pardon me. Okay.
It's okay.
When we got
No.
to the table, that's right. When we got to the table.
We got to the table, yeah.
Yeah. So
It was big.
the key thing here is the Employment Standards Act, and in human resources, that is an act that we need to know inside out, because it sets the minimums for so many things, like how many weeks of vacation we have to provide, time off with pay, time off without pay, like all kinds of stuff is within the Employment Standards Act. And so if she's working for a small company that makes carbon fiber parts. So that's the first thing that you look at and you go, okay, that's going to be under provincial jurisdiction. So if it's located in PEI, I've got to look at their Employment Standards Act. If she's located in Saskatchewan, I have to look under their Employment Standards Act. And what did you find the rate in Saskatchewan?
81.
1181, yeah. So there's a pretty big variation, and the thing around minimum wage is that it does change fairly regularly. In Ontario, we have elections coming up, so the current incumbent has increased the rate as part of his election stuff. So my advice on Employment Standards Act is, yeah, have an idea in your mind what it is, but before you put forward a recommendation, just check your numbers against the most current legislation. Okay. Anything else you guys want to say about this one before we move on?
It generated a lot of discussion before we landed on Employment Standards Act. So thank you for joining our group.
Yeah. So what would your advice be to people based on your discussion?
Well, I think my team members might have different comments. For me, it was like, I just care about Nova Scotia. Show me the Nova Scotia content and where I need to look for Nova Scotia.
And that's fine
Yeah.
if you're working for an organization and they are located in Nova Scotia and you don't have to worry about anybody else. But my first job was with CIL, and we had chemical plants all over Canada. And so I got used to having to look at all legislation because we were a chemical company, so we were falling under provincial jurisdiction, and we wanted to treat our employees the same. But we needed to check the legislation in each province in order to do that. Aaron, you had a question.
I may have missed this in the reading somewhere, but with remote work, where people don't actually have a location where you are working now, where do you only follow where your office is located, not where the worker is located?
That's an awesome question. I would believe it would be where the organization is located.
Okay.
Because if you had to do it, if you had to change, looking at the legislation for where each employee was living, that would be bedlam. Because
I would think it would also be a deterrent to offering remote work.
Yeah, but even if you didn't have remote work, let's say you had a company that was located right on the border of Ontario and Quebec. And so some employees were living in Ontario and some would be living in Quebec. But the organization, wherever they're located, is what is going to be used to, what they're doing is first. So if they fell under provincial, then where they're located is going to be the legislation that would apply.
Okay.
Okay. Good question though. Any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, well, let's have a look at poor old Yogi and Boo Boo. And who's going to speak to this particular case?
I can,
Okay.
if my internet holds up. We were the group that struggled because we figured that Banff National Park obviously is part of the national park system, but we wondered if it was then regulated provincially, again, just because of where it falls. But since it cannot be both, it should become federal legislation. So yeah, it was just a little bit of confusion for our group, just determining if Alberta would have a say, because it does have a Occupational Health and Safety Act that seemed to answer the right to refuse dangerous work, but so does the Canada Labour Code. And so that's what they would be looking at for the legislation to protect Ranger Smith from the bears.
Yeah. So the big one there was just understanding the difference between a national park and a provincial park. So if it's a national park, then it's under federal jurisdiction. And if it's a provincial park, like Algonquin Provincial Park, then it would be under provincial legislation, right? So, and then the other tricky thing about this was, so you decide, okay, fine, it's under federal jurisdiction, but when you start looking for the federal health and safety, it's actually under the Canada Labour Code. So that right to refuse dangerous work is consistent throughout all the health and safety legislation. It's just where are you going to find it? Sometimes, just in that case, it was a little tricky. Okay, and let's go down to the last one, where we had a whole bunch of different actions that people wanted to take. And if the group that was working on this could just pick one or two to talk about, that would be great.
I guess I can speak to this.
Right.
We actually made it through all of them. Some that we stumbled on a little bit, we didn't actually disagree on any of them. But one we stumbled on a little bit was the office building, because we kind of end up asking further questions like, do we own the building? Do we lease the building? A few more things like that. So just to kind of, make the advice of like, you know, just because it doesn't seem to be an issue at the moment, especially like normally living in Halifax, this is something that gets brought up regularly with a lot of our old buildings and things, that we should have a plan to either move to an accessible space or create accessibility. Because obviously, as we, you know, get into a hiring process at any time, we can't not hire somebody because of accessibility reasons. But again, it also plays into if we own the building or not, and what we do and don't have the right to do. So do we have to move? Are we allowed to do things to the space, and things like that? The other one that we struggled a little bit with was we of course had a million questions about the Muslim employee that has been disciplined for excessive absenteeism. He took time off to attend prayer at his mosque, because if he was disciplined for excessive absenteeism, was that when we found out that he was attending prayer? Was this something that came up in the employment process, that this was something that was important to him, and thought that perhaps the best course of action would be to, you know, plan some sort of meeting about maybe if there was the possibility of a revised schedule that would be appropriate to accommodate you know, his life, but we weren't really sure what was the requirement there versus like, because we don't know what has come up in, like, was this already discussed? We have too many questions like that. We look for too many details.
Yeah. So on a simple basis, can we discipline or terminate somebody because they are taking time off work for prayers?
No, but I guess the question is, what is considered an appropriate, like, how is it affecting the work is the question. Is it even affecting the work? Okay.
So a lot of the legislation will require us to accommodate the employee. And an example of an accommodation that was made, I saw at a couple of community colleges in Ontario, was that they created a prayer room on campus. And
well,
so
that's what was also confusing, like how that wasn't a possibility, like the fact that this person was actually leaving, it's like, okay, was this like not seen as a space that was comfortable for this to happen? Like the fact that it went straight to a discipline seems very strange. But of course, depending on what type of organization it is or whatever as well, seems quite like a big part of the question. Yeah.
So it could be seen as a human rights issue, and the question is, can I accommodate? And what a lot of places are doing, are they creating spaces for Muslim employees where they can go and have a prayer room, and that becomes their space. So lots of different things that you can do to accommodate. And that's really what the legislation is asking employers to think about, or what are some of the creative ways that we can make the workplace more accessible for people's needs that are outside of the regular stuff that we've seen in the past. Any others in there that you wanted? Oh, I'm looking, it's 12:28. We never got to play Kahoot. Holy smokes. Are there any others that were on here that somebody wanted to ask a question about? If you raise your hand, I can see, you'll pop up to the top of the screen. Yes, Duran.
We actually, I get a lot from this table. Is there just a black and white treatment around, or guidance you have on the last one, family and or other applicants to jobs in the workplace?
Oh, we're the VP of marketing.
Yeah.
So what were you guys saying? Do you think you can deny somebody a job because they're married to somebody there?
Or we went around this topic like it's common sense. Use common sense. So we were like, I had a situation in the past where the question came up, can my partner apply? And then that person would be supervising their partner.
Okay, so that's where you start to get into issues, right? So when the employee is making decisions about performance and pay for a partner, then the argument that there could be some bias is quite clear. And so having them as your direct report, an organization may say that that would be inappropriate, but preventing them from being hired across the board could be seen as a human rights issue, discrimination based on marital status.
Would there be normally, depending on the size of the organization, that already written in company policy?
Okay, can policy change the law? Can I do something
No.
within my policy that takes away rights that I have through the law?
Not that, no, but with that, just the idea of kind of deterring it in the first place.
So I can't deter somebody from applying because that would be human rights. But I can prevent a situation where partners are reporting to each other and key decisions around promotions, pay, performance cannot be done by a partner because there could be bias. That's
That's what I
introduced.
mean. Like,
Yeah,
would you write that into your policy though, that like that they can't be like a direct report or something like that?
yeah, I could write
Yeah.
that into my policy if I wanted to. If I found that it was necessary,
Right.
right? So, but those good points, because we can't do something that takes away rights that I already have under the legislation. Okay, and that's key. So I'm just going to do a quick summary and then I got to let you guys go because holy smokes, it's getting late. So legislation, really important in HR because it does set the requirements. It sets the boundaries for us about what we can and cannot do. It's very important to understand if you're under provincial or federal legislation because you got to look at the right thing. If I make a recommendation thinking that they're under different legislation, then people are going to be looking at me going, what are you doing? You know, pay equity or how much I'm paying stuff. And the third thing is I can't take away those rights. So so paternity leave, if I've got it under legislation, you can't turn around and tell somebody they can't take paternity leave. Okay. Next week, we're going to start into more in-depth application with respect to diversity, inclusion, and equity. So there's lots and lots of stuff. And next week, we're going to start applying it to the case study. That's why we were going to play Kahoot, but we didn't get a chance to do it today. So maybe we'll play it at the beginning of next class. I don't know. I'll see what we're going to be doing. But please make sure that you're confident about what's going on at the pharmacy in our case study, because we've got some diversity challenges coming up. And what have I got? Share screen. Share. So the issue is around, like, we're going to be looking at the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is a particularly, I'll post this slide so you can see, but I really like how they kind of break out the three different approaches and how that impacts on employees. And we're going to try and look at how do we put together some recommendations for the owner of the pharmacy so that she can promote her diversity, equity, and inclusion activities. Okay. So, sorry I kept you late. Away you go, because I know you got lots of stuff to do. And if anybody wants to ask me any questions, I'll hang around for a few minutes afterwards. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday.